Welcome to Garden City Church, a place where you can belong before you believe. This week, George talks to us about virtue through the story of Joseph. If you'd like to partner with us here at the channel, there's 3 ways you can do that. You can like and subscribe, share this video with a friend, or you can partner with us financially. If you'd like to do that, you can do that through our website, or you can mail us a check. We love you guys so much. Let's get into the Word with George.
We've been in this series on character, on Christian virtue, on Christ-like virtue. And if you're anything like me, when someone brings up the idea of character and the topic of character, it might be really exciting, like it was for me when I was a kid and my parents would talk about character. Usually it was involved a vacation while we're setting up a tent, and a storm comes and we're drenched and it's miserable. And I'm like, why are we here? And my parents are like, because it builds character. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when we bring up that topic, it can kind of cause people to tune out. But in the day that we live in the times that we live in, where people are so easily distracted and there's so much polarity and around relationships and politics and even religion, and there can just be so much polarization that we can start focusing on other people's issues, on other people's problems, on other distractions, and not be looking at ourselves and our own issues and our own distractions and working on our own character. And these days, I just think the character is so important. Now, some people, when they think about the development of their life, they have like different mental models. There's a guy named David Brooks who talks about 2 yous, or 2 aspects of you. He talks about the resume you and the funeral you. And we talked a little bit about this last week. But the resume you is the you that you want people to know about, your achievements, the things you've conquered, the things you've accomplished, that your strengths, the things that can take you places. And the funeral you, or the funeral character and virtues, are like, it's the you that you want to be remembered for, like the aspects of you that were the best parts of you. And last week we talked about, like, how do we not just oppose those things and say, hey, pick one or the other, the funeral you or the resume you, because we live in the world where we have to have a resume, and our doing and our action is important, but also that interior life, the interior journey is just as important. And what would it look like to have an integrated life? Last week we looked at a story that talked about the integration that we saw in a character named Jacob. This week, we're going to be looking at character in the sense of formation. How is our character forged and shaped in us? And so today we're going to be looking at a story about the forging of character in the person named Joseph. So to set up the story of Joseph, you need to know a few things. Joseph was the youngest son of Jacob. He had a bunch of older brothers, and his father favored Joseph over all the other brothers. He gave him like a special coat. He didn't have Joseph go out and work in the fields with his brothers, so he got to take it easy. He just had a lot of favoritism, and the brothers felt it. And that favoritism caused enmity, it caused hatred between Joseph and his brothers. Joseph didn't hate them, but they were jealous. They were angry, and it became a form of hatred. He was seen as a tattletale, and he would say things that like probably weren't the smartest, like, oh, I had a dream where all of you guys were serving me and I was better than you. And it like angered his brothers. And so we're picking up the story where there's a lot of tension that's built up over the years between the brothers and him. And in Genesis 37, we pick up the story when Joseph's brothers saw him coming toward them, where they were working where they were working for their father. They recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, like a pit, where we can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. I don't know about you, but like with my siblings, we never had this depth of hatred. Like, as you're reading this story, it's like a tragedy, but it's got some like dark humor in it. It's just ridiculous, some of the thinking and some of the stuff. I remember the worst with me and my sister was like, I hate you. And then I hate you back. And then my mom saying, you can't use the word hate. That's a bad word. So we'd be like, I hate you. I'd be like, no, I hate you. And then later, a few hours later, we'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. No, I love you. I didn't mean it. But this is pretty intense. You look at verse 21, it goes on with the story. It says, but then Reuben heard of their scheme, this like horrible scheme, and he came to Joseph's rescue. He really cared about his brother. He said, let's not kill him. That's good. And then he said, why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness, and then he'll die without our laying hands on him. Reuben comes up with the rescue plan is, hey, let's just let him die slowly. It goes on to say Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. But you can just tell there's not a lot of great thinking going on here. In verse 23, it says, then Joseph arrived and his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. And then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. They ripped off this cloak that represented their father's favor that they didn't have. It was like this object of enmity and hatred for them ultimately, and jealousy. And then they threw him in the pit. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Just as they were sitting down to eat, while Joseph is just in this pit, the brothers go to eat. They look up and they saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming down toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum and balm and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother? We'll have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother and our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. And so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took Joseph to Egypt. So when you look at the life of Joseph, he hit three major pits. The first one was this pit of betrayal. Like his brothers throw him into this literal pit and they betray him. And then while they're talking about like the best way to kill him, they're like, oh, let's not have blood on our hands. Let's sell him down the river. Let's sell him into slavery. So the second pit was slavery. First one's betrayal. Second is slavery, where he loses agency over his future, his life, his body. And then the third pit in his life is eventually prison. And the story goes where when he gets to Egypt, he actually, with integrity and with his hard work, and he was very gifted in administration and leadership, he worked his way up into a man named Potiphar's household and became like the leader of that household. So as Joseph was leading in this household, he eventually was accused of something he didn't do and was unjustly thrown into prison. And Egyptian prisons, back in these days were not nice places. They were literally a pit that you got thrown into, and it was terrible. And so like another unjust, unfair, awful thing happens to him and totally outside of his control. And while he's in this new pit, he doesn't give up. I mean, I don't know about you, but after the first betrayal and then being sold into slavery, like there'd be a part of you that just would want to give up. Like he doesn't give up on his faith. I wonder if there were some hard conversations with God, but he doesn't give up on his faith, continues to trust in the Lord, continues to work with integrity, continues to just do the things that are core to who he is and the gifts that he's been given. And he eventually works his way up in the prison. He wins favor with the guards. And then ultimately, there's a conundrum that the Pharaoh has, and the only one who's able to solve it is Joseph. And so he ends up getting elevated out of prison and is ultimately elevated to the second highest leader in all of Egypt. And when he was sold into slavery, he was around 17 years old. And when he was given his freedom, he was about 30. So because of his brother's actions, he lost about 13 years of his life, the way that he had probably imagined it. It just went totally different. And each one of these three major pits that he was thrown into shaped his character. You know, there's something so, I think, so important for us to to learn here. And I think there's some complexity, but if we were to pull some of the strands back, I think we see a few things. One is that when we get, especially when I look at my life, when I go through a pit, like not a literal one, but like just something that is maybe a spiritual pit or emotional pit or like health, there's a health thing going on, or someone in my life is really hurting. When I'm in the pit, like and I look back at those times, it's sometimes the biggest moments of growth in my life are when I go through the pit. I would never choose it. I would never want it, but there can be some of the biggest growth as a person that happens in those times. Now, at the same time, when I look back on my life and I look at times I've been in a pit, it's also the times where I've gotten the most stuck and maybe like get into a pattern or like a downward spiral rather than an upward spiral. And I become less the person I want to be rather than more. And for me, when I go through times like this, I notice that I stop looking up. I stop dreaming. I stop, sometimes my prayer life is impacted. I don't laugh as much. Like there's like that levity and the joy kind of like drains from my heart and my life. The aperture of my vision for life and my future kind of like start to close in and get smaller. The irritability kind of goes up, and sometimes even my decision making and my patience all go down. And sometimes people have to walk on eggshells around me, the ones I love and that are closest to me. And I don't know what lights go off on your dashboard when you're in the pit and you're stuck and you're like not finding a way through it. And I've even had times where like ways I've got through certain pits in my life by just gritting through it, just grinding through it. Like that strategy doesn't work in new things that I experience in life, and maybe hardships that I didn't expect that have more complexity, or for whatever reason, my old strategy doesn't help me work through it. And I've had to learn to give myself grace in that. There might be some of you listening right now and like you are a doer and achiever, and you push through things and you figure things out and you give grace to other people. You give grace to everybody but yourself. And I just want to encourage you. Sometimes we get into pits where like you can't just grind through it, and you're going to have to be patient, and you have to give yourself some grace. But whatever we're facing, whatever pit that we might find ourselves going into or at the bottom of or trying to come out of, how do we allow it to forge our character towards something more beautiful, something good, something more healthy? And this is where the story of Jesus, like I want to bring it in a little bit before we come back to Joseph, is so helpful for me. Jesus was teaching the way of the kingdom, and he always connected to like the origin story where God created, the heavens and the earth and created the world beautiful and good. And he created humans as image bearers whose their job was to image or reflect God's love and power and goodness, God's character, reflecting that to the world, and then reflecting the world's gratitude and joy and love back to God. That was like the original job, the vocation of a human, is to be an image bearer, this reflector of the very character of God. And when things got broken in the garden and this downward spiral happened, the humanity fell into a pit it couldn't get out of on its own. Jesus, when he comes onto the scene, he is helping us have a picture, and not only the power, but also the picture of what a image bearer can become and what we should be like. And so when we're learning to take on character and we're talking about virtue, it's not talking about like trying to earn our way to heaven by being better people. It's talking about putting on the new humanity, like putting on the character of Christ, his love, his service, his hope, his joy, his peace, his faith, like all these Christian virtues, humility. These things are us learning to be forged or reforged back into what humans were originally supposed to be. Now, if that's the case, Joseph is a beautiful picture of this. And Paul writes about this pattern of character formation, probably from his own life, but we know Paul, the New Testament writer, was always looking back to the Old Testament. And check out this pattern that he writes about in Romans chapter 5. Paul writes, we know that when we suffer, we develop endurance, which then shapes our characters. And when our characters are refined and forged, we learn what it means to hope and anticipate God's goodness. Oh, I love that. That when we go through suffering, it doesn't just have to lead to a downward spiral. It can. But if we're intentional, I think, and if we have our eyes set on Christ, if we have our eyes set on like God, and we don't like let go of our trust and faith, when we go through suffering, it can produce endurance. And endurance can produce this character in us that then produces hope. Here's the beautiful thing. Character can be formed in us. Virtue can be formed in us in the hardest and most difficult of times and places. Like I used to think like, oh, I've got to develop godly, Christ-like character, good character. I need to like set my life up perfect. I need to have the perfect environment. I need to do the perfect spiritual disciplines. I have to have the perfect prayer life. I need to have the perfect friends or the right kind of friends and the right kind of situation. And everything's got to be tweaked so like this environment I have is just like perfect for shaping me to the perfect person. But character, as we look through the stories of Scripture, and especially Joseph, is formed most powerfully through suffering. And the life of Joseph and the suffering he goes through is like an echo, or it's an early echo of what we see in Christ going through the cross, revealing the very character of God. In fact, aspects of God's character that we might not have seen otherwise if he had not gone through the cross and gone through suffering. And that suffering can produce endurance, and that endurance shapes our character so that we become hopeful and able to see and join the goodness of God. This means that character formation happens in imperfect situations and places and times. It's like it takes pressure and darkness to shape a diamond. So when we come to this moment where there's a famine and Joseph's family comes to get help, to get food, and they encounter Joseph and they don't realize it's him. And when he reveals himself, there's this moment of realization by his brothers that we have betrayed him. And now we are in his power. Like where we used to have the power, we threw him in a pit. Now he can throw us in a pit. And I want us to just look at Joseph's response. Check this out. So in the story we pick up, Joseph has become the most powerful man in Egypt. He's around 30 years old. He's been given his life back. And during that time, a famine hits. And he's in charge of administering and leading this time of famine. And his brothers come for food and they don't recognize him. Now, on this particular trip, Joseph decides to keep his brother Benjamin that he had never met before and send his brothers back to his dad, and they still don't know who he is. And when he suggests that he keeps his brother back, Judah the betrayer, the ringleader, says, our father has already suffered so much. We can't do that. Like Judah's learned the lesson. I can never break my father's heart. I can never do that to another brother and leave someone behind for my family. And in this moment, in Genesis 45, it says Joseph could stand it no longer. There were so many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out all of you. And so he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And then he broke down and wept. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word spread quickly throughout Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless, and they were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. You know, like you can just imagine like what is going to happen? I mean, they were going to kill him, and then they sold him into slavery. Joseph now has the power that they had over him. He's the one with power. Is he going to kill him? He could easily do to them what they did to him, put them into slavery. You could just see all of their lives flashing before their eyes as they're realizing what's happening in this moment. Look at Joseph's response. Look at the character he has formed through the hardship and the betrayal and the ugliness that has come into his life. Look how he turns this to good. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer, probably a little tentatively. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. Like, you did this to me. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Wow. I don't know if I could say something like that. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. Like, there's not going to be any food to survive, he's saying. But God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here and not you. He is the one who made me advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all of Egypt. Like, God is the one who's delivered me. He's the one who's had his hand on me. And even when you were trying to harm me, God turned it to good. Listen to this. He says, now go back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. I'm alive, and God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. So now come to me immediately. And he does, and they're reunited as a family for years. And it's this really powerful moment. But later when Jacob, the father, dies, the brothers get scared again. They say, but now that our father's dead, now that Joseph is going to show his anger, and he's going to pay us back for all the wrong we did to him. And revenge is going to be taken. And now listen to these words from Joseph in verse 19. Joseph replies to them in a world full of like revenge, a world full of like ugliness and returning hate for hate and ugliness for ugliness. He says, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Oh, could you say that after what he had experienced? He said, no, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. I just think this is so powerful. Over the story of Joseph's life is just this absorbing of pain and like unfairness and injustice. And he finds a way to turn it to good. And it's, you hear it in his words, this faith that says, hey, what you meant for evil, God turned to good. And God has delivered me, and God has taken care of me. And I'm not going to let the ugliness take my family away a second time. I'm not going to let my brothers who I've had no contact with be taken from me. I want a relationship with you. And he forgives them. Wow. He turns evil to good. He trusts God to turn evil to good in his life. There's this quote, it's attributed to Abraham Lincoln. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a dang good quote. And it says this: nearly all men can stand adversity. But if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Like, any human being can go through elements of adversity. Not all of them can go through it well. I don't always go through it well. But I love that it says, like, if you want to test someone's character to the max, give them power. And Joseph goes through all this adversity and continues to be shaped and formed into something better, into something more powerful and loving. And then when he's given power, he doesn't give in to temptation to abuse it and to take revenge. He becomes Christ-like. He serves with his power. So I want to leave you with this today. When you go through the pit, when you're going through the challenges of life, how is your character being shaped? And will you take the pattern that's so easy, that kind of that downward spiral, or you allow suffering to produce endurance to shape your character, and character to bring you hope and faith in the goodness of God? Guys, I love you so much. Have a great week.
You're the resurrection that we've waited for. You buried the night, came with the morning. You're the King of heaven, the praise is yours. The longer the quiet, the louder the chorus. We will sing a new song, 'cause dead is dead and gone with the winter. We will sing a new song, let hallelujahs flow like a river, coming back to life, reaching towards the light. Your love is like springtime. You're the living water, God, we thirst for you. The dry and the barren, the flower and bloom. You're the sun that's shining, you restore my soul. The deeper you call us, well, the deeper we'll go. 'Cause we will sing a new song, 'cause dead is dead and gone with the winter. We will sing a new song, let hallelujahs flow like a river, we're coming back to life, reaching towards the light. Your love is like springtime, like springtime. Come tend the soil, come tend the soil of my soul. And like a garden, and like a garden I will grow. Yes, I will grow. Tend the soil, come tend the soil of my soul. And like a garden, and like a garden I will grow. Yes, I will grow. Yes, I will grow. Yes, I will grow. We will sing a new song, 'cause dead is dead and gone with the winter. We will sing a new song, let hallelujahs flow like a river, we're coming back to life, reaching towards the light. Your love is like springtime, like springtime, like springtime, like springtime.